At the moment, I'm going to move into chapter 2 of Tom Cheetham, The World Turned Inside Out, Henry Corbin and the Angel Out Ahead, entitled An Oriental Theosophy. And so this is going to be a pretty uh, sort of whirlwind overview of a variety of sort of Persian cosmologies. And the context for this is found in the first video in the series, the first 5 minutes. So I'm going to go straight into this, hoping that people will appreciate that context, at least for me. Let's see what of this I can get through in one go. So the previous 2 episodes here were quite Heideggerian, focusing on the phenomenology that Corbin is leading us toward. And this is a little bit more historical. Okay. John Cheetham, an Oriental, an Oriental Theosophy. Massignon's transmission of the great work of Surawadi into Corbin's hands was a defining event in his life. The Sheikh al-Ishraq, master of Oriental light, was born in Surawad in northwest Iran in 1155 and died martyred by Saladin and his religious inquisitors in the city of Aleppo in what is now Syria in 1191. Surawadi saw himself as the resurrector of the wisdom of ancient Persia within the context of the Islamic revelation. Iran was to occupy an especially important place in Corbin's personal spiritual iconography. Central to much of his work is the idea that the spiritual history of humanity will be truncated until we come to understand the possibilities that the specifically Iranian opens up to us. In the course of his early studies, the young theologian from the Christian West pursued both Arabic and Sanskrit, Islam on the one hand, and Indian philosophy and Hinduism on the other. But with the discovery of Surawadi, the die was cast. Quote, Persia was situated at the center, a median and mediating world, because Persia, ancient Iran, is not only a nation or an empire, it is a spiritual universe, a focus of the history of religions. He understood Iran as a mediating world, both geographically and metaphysically. It symbolized for him the mundus imaginalis, the imaginal world, and the freedom of the soul that this announces. The history of Iranian Islam is closely tied to the fate of Shi'ism. In the 16th century, Shi'ism became the official state religion of Iran. It is largely in Shiite terms that Corbin understood prophetic religion. Or perhaps it is better to say that it is in Shi'ism that he found best expressed the inner core of prophetic religion. In order to make our way around in Corbin's world, it is essential to be familiar with at least the roughest outlines of Iranian and Islamic history. Here, we can only briefly review those facets of that long and complex story which are the most indispensable for a grasp of Corbin's work. As he himself said, this is a lost continent for most Westerners. This section is called Persia and Mazdaism, and it quickly gets quite metaphysical. So we're exploring Iranian spirituality in the context of approaching Corbin, because there's a lot to it. Anyway, Persia and Mazdaism. The first of the 2 ages of Iranian spirituality to which Corbin refers is the pre-Islamic era, which can be dated from the origins of a specifically Iranian complex of beliefs and practices, in the middle of the second millennium BCE, and which extended through 4 dynasties. This is the pre-Islamic era. And that extended through 4 dynasties. The Achaemenid, Seleucid, Parthian, and Sasanian. The second age is the Islamic, beginning with the collapse of the Sassanid Empire in 637 CE and extending to the present day. Ancient Persia was a vast domain, which by 1800 BCE extended from the Zagros Mountains to Transoxiana. The Iranian religion was closely related to that of the Vedas, with a panoply of gods and spirits. Central to this system of beliefs was the significance of fire and light. Zarathustra, or as he was known to the Greeks, Zoroastrian, was a priest of the religion and saw himself as a reformer of this complex faith that he believed to have degenerated. He was born in northern or eastern Persia and lived between 1500 and 1200 BCE. His prophetic calling began with the appearance of the angel Vohumana, who escorted him on a visionary voyage to the supreme deity, Ahura Mazda, wise lord, or Mazd, or Mazd in Pahlavi. Anyway, Ahura Mazda. Subsequent revelations confirmed his prophetic mission. This is Zarathustra. His chief concerns were to institute an eschatological monotheism based on the primacy of Ahura Mazda over all other deities, to establish a cosmology in which the divine light engages in a struggle with darkness, and to purge what he saw as excesses in the religion, such as blood sacrifice and ritual use of intoxicants. The sacred text of Zoroastrianism, or Mazdaism, is the Avesta. The earliest parts are traditionally attributed to Zarathustra. The latest texts were perhaps written down in the 4th century BCE, but the text was altered at times, even after the Islamic conquest. There is little doubt that portions of the earliest pre-monotheistic texts have been lost, due in part to the purification instituted by the Prophet. The final canonical form was given to it during the Sasanian Empire between 226 and 635 CE. The content and subsequent development of Zarathustra's message was to be crucial for the monotheistic religions of the Near East, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In contrast to the prevailing static view of time and creation, shared by Egyptians, Sumerians, Canaanites, all the Aryan peoples, both Indian and Iranian, and the pre-exilic Israelites, Zarathustra proposed a cosmology based upon the existence of purpose and directionality in the world. In this cosmology, creation is the stage for a divine drama, the struggle between light and darkness, which will one day come to an end with the final battle in which the savior, Shayashant, will complete the victory of light. Each human soul is free to choose his own part in this drama, and its ultimate fate, in heaven or in hell, will depend on this choice. In a reworking of an ancient Indo-Iranian theme, after death, each soul is said to meet its celestial self in the form of a young woman on the road to the beyond that passes over the Sinvat bridge. Again, I apologize if I mispronounce anything, and when I do this, it says they're capitalized words, which is there's rather a lot of. This bridge of sorting appears wide to the just and as narrow as a razor to the evil who plummet into hell. If the origin of this eschatological, if the origin of this eschatological worldview lies with Mazdaism, as Cohn argues, then it was the Zoroastrians and not the Israelites who served as the original midwives for the birth of history. While, strictly speaking, Mazdaism is neither polytheist nor dualist, it was never a rigid and abstract monism. And over time, the ancient mythic and polytheistic past reasserted itself, even during the time of the prophet. Ormazd is surrounded by a group of divine beings, the Amesha Spentas, who personify such attributes as justice and devotion. He is also father to several other beings, including a pair of twins, one of whom freely chose evil over good and became the destroying spirit, Ahriman. The evil one is thus not evil by nature, but by choice. This initiates the cosmic drama. The defining characteristic of Mazdaism is the centrality of this cosmic struggle, and this vision of the moral structure of creation sounds the primary note of a theme that was to resonate through the centuries in the great religions of the Middle East. In the words of a 20th century Zoroastrian, quote, "Not by mere negation of evil, not by retreat before it, but by facing it boldly and fighting it with all one's might, may man hope to fulfill his lofty destiny to redeem the world from evil and establish the kingdom of righteousness on this earth. He was but animal yesterday. He is man today. His destiny is to be angel, if not all at once, in the not distant hereafter, as the result of the gradual process of self-perfection." In Mazdaean cosmology, Mazd created the world for the very purpose of annihilating evil. And so cosmology and eschatology are indistinguishable. Limited or finite, eschatological time is created in order for the struggle to take place. This inaugurates the conception of a linear purposive time rather than the primordial time of cyclical mythologies. Time is linear insofar as the events that occur in it take their meaning from the sequence of their occurrence. Again, quote, "Time is linear insofar as the events that occur in it take their meaning from the sequence of their occurrence." Mazd is originally finite, since he is delimited by his opposite, Ahriman. In the initial event of this drama, Ahriman attacks. But Ormazd had foreseen this and had produced a concrete but spiritual creation, the world of the Menok, which, in order to counter the attack, is made corporeal, or getik, so that Ormazd can become infinite in space as well as time. This world is created as the battleground of good and evil. But before transferring creation to the getik state or corporeal state, Ormazd asked the innumerable heavenly spirits, the Fravartis, if they would take on corporeal existence in order to help in combating Ahriman's forces. They agreed to this. Thus, the origin of their name, which means those who have chosen, those who have chosen. Quote from Iliad, "This testifies to the attachment for incarnate life, for work, and in the last analysis, for matter. an attachment that is a specific characteristic of Zarathustra's message. This is to be contrasted in the strongest terms with the pessimism and radical dualism that were characteristic of Manichaeism and the various movements generally called Gnostic, which sprang up in the centuries preceding and following the birth of Christ. Material creation is good. It is only Ahriman that corrupts it. The material world is not the realm of darkness. It is made of the same substance as the soul. Each person has a subtle body, which exists in the Menok world, which is a concrete but spiritual creation produced by Ormazd in foresight of Ahriman's attack. Each person has a subtle body which exists in the Menok world as a resurrection body of light. It is only after Ahriman enters and pollutes the Getic world, the corporeal world, that it becomes a world of mixture. By virtue of their freedom, humans can collaborate in the work of redemption of the material world. By virtue of their freedom, humans can collaborate in the work of redemption of the material world. Quote again from Eliade, "For in the eyes of Mazdaism, the material creation, that is matter and life, is good in itself and worthy to be purified and restored. Indeed, the doctrine of the resurrection of bodies proclaims the inestimable value of the creation." Again, indeed, the doctrine of the resurrection of bodies proclaims the inestimable value of the creation. This is the most rigorous and the most daring religious valorization of matter that we know of before the Western chemist philosophers of the 17th century. This is not to, again, continuing with Tom Cheetham, this is not to say there is an indiscriminate celebration of matter. The polluted matter of Ahriman must be eliminated from the mixture, and therefore there is an emphasis on ritual purity. The ordered world must be kept apart from the disordered. Any contact of the impure creation with the good creation must be avoided in order to prevent the former from undermining the latter, the impure creation from undermining the good creation. Quote, "Dirt, rust, mold, blight, and also, quote, anything that issues from the human body are all impure. As are certain kinds of creatures that it is the Zoroastrians' duty to destroy. Ants, beetles, scorpions, lizards, snakes, and wolves are among the instruments of Ahriman. Therefore, through both active ritual and moral struggle against the forces of Ahriman, the Zoroastrian was, quote, directly and constantly involved in the processes helping to sustain the order of the world. All members of the community took part, through the ordinary tasks of everyday life, in sustaining and strengthening the ordered world. Thus, the rules of the religion served both to democratize its members and to set them off from others of different faiths. Humans were understood to be active participants in the course of this new sense of history. I'm going to repeat this part because I feel that it's important. Again, there was an emphasis on ritual purity, and what we saw was, therefore, through both active ritual and moral struggle against the forces of Ahriman, the Zoroastrian was, quote, directly and constantly involved in the processes, helping to sustain the order of the world. Quote, all members of the community took part, through the ordinary tasks of everyday life, in sustaining and strengthening the ordered world. Thus, the rules of the religion served both to democratize its members and to set them off from others of different faiths. Humans were understood to be active participants in the course of this new sense of history, not as in the modern conception, merely technicians moving matter around in space, hoping perhaps for utopian better days to come, but cosmically important moral agents whose very being has an impact on the outcome of the struggle. The modern philosophical sense of ontology, which Heidegger hoped to undermine, pales to embarrassing insignificance in comparison. In trying to grasp what eschatology and history meant for these people, and what it means today for the esoteric and ahistorical Muslims, history must be understood against the background of the mythic sensibility that gave birth to it. The nature and role of esoteric or ecstatic rites in Mazdaism is not clear, but that such rites existed is certain. Zarathustra seems to have opposed at least the uncontrolled use of trance-inducing intoxicants. The illuminative knowledge that was to be obtained by rites and rituals is thought to have been a visionary illumination and gnosis of initiation, in which botanical intoxicants played a small part. This illumination itself, which transfigures the soul, ensures salvation, and at the final resurrection, at the end of limited time, the world itself derives from Ormazd, who is the source of the divine light. Svarna, literally Xvarnah. Svarna, I don't know how to pronounce that. I might just repeat that because, again, it does feel significant to me. The nature and role of esoteric or ecstatic rites in Mazdaism is not clear, but that such rites existed is certain. Zarathustra seems to have opposed at least the uncontrolled use of trance-inducing intoxicants. The illuminative knowledge that was to be obtained by rites and rituals is thought to have been a visionary illumination and gnosis of initiation, in which botanical intoxicants played a small part. This illumination itself, which transfigures the soul, ensures salvation, and at the final resurrection at the end of limited time, the world itself derives from Ormazd, who is the source of the divine light, Xvarna. This transforming light appears as the result of the unmixing of the Ahrimanian pollution with the original pure creation. It is the light of Xvarna that Surawadi, it is in the light of Xvarna that Surawadi will find the orient of pure light from the ancient Iranian sages. Iranian sages that he found raised to another level in the Quran. Quote, God is the light of the heavens and the earth. The semblance of his light is that of a niche in which is a lamp, the flame within a glass, the glass a glittering star, as it were, lit with the oil of a blessed tree, the olive, neither of the east nor of the west, whose oil appears to light up even though fire touches it not, light upon light. Quran 24:35. Okay. So again, that was a quote from the Quran that was tied to what Suravati was talking about. And that's all in the context of this Mazdaist or Zoroastrian cosmology, metaphysics of duality. We're talking about ritual and rite and gnosis and initiation, as well as eschatology and history. And now we're going to continue. Over time, Mazdaean orthodoxy progressively hardened the dualism between the powers of Ormazd and Ahriman. This was opposed to Zurvanite theology, which seems to have developed under the Arsacids, although how widespread this movement became is not known. The Arsacids, or I'm not sure how to pronounce that, sorry, um, are the third of the four dynasties that I did mention earlier, which were this was in the, obviously this is pre-Islamic and then the Islamic era in Iran. And that pre-Islamic had four different dynasties, the Achaemenid, Seleucid, Parthian, and Sasanian. And that third one, the Parthian, is also known as the Arsacid or Arsacid dynasty. And it's that dynasty which produced a, quote, Zurvanite theology, which seems to resist the hardening of the dualism between the powers of Ormuzd and Ahriman. And so it goes on. In Zurvanism, both Ormuzd and Ahriman are sons of Zurvan, a figure who can be dated as far back as the Achaemenid period, the first dynasty. Zurvan is referred to as both time and space, so that, quote, speculations on time-space as the common source of the two principles of good and evil were familiar to the Iranians. Speculations on time-space as the common source of the two principles of good and evil were familiar to the Iranians. The structure of limited finite time is made clear by three figures. This is still in Zurvanism. Gayomard, Zarathustra, and Saoshyant. Gayomard is the androgynous primordial Macranthropos, sprung from the coupling of Ormuzd and Spandamat, the angel of the earth. The planets proceed from his body, and from his semen springs rhubarb, from which comes the first human pair. He is killed by Ahriman, but transmits the revelation to the first humans. This is Gayamart. He is equal to both Zarathustra and Saoshyant, as an exemplar of the just and perfect human. Zarathustra himself stands midway in time between the primal human and the savior. Okay, so there's a way that these, again, the structure of limited finite time is made clear by three figures, and it's Gayamart, Zarathustra, and Saoshyant, and they appear to be structured in time in a certain way that Gayamart is the androgynous primordial Mecanthropos, whereas Zarathustra appears midway in time between the primordial human and the savior. And so the figure of Saoshyant is the final savior who will appear at the end of time, and, quote, is a crucial element in the Mazdaean schema that will have a long history in the religions of Abraham. So I would say that the structure of Gayamart, Zarathustra, and Saoshyant is somewhat equivalent to what I would consider, you could say, through Steiner, Lucifer Christ Ahriman, or perhaps Jung, Lucifer Christ Ion, but I'm not sure. That's just an aside. Now, during the reigns of the Achaemenids, named Cyrus and Darius, who died in 530 and 486 BCE, respectively. During the reigns of the Achaemenids, Cyrus and Darius, the Persian Empire grew by conquest until it stretched from beyond the Nile in the west to the Indus in the east, and a distinct Persian culture was established. Zoroastrian fire temples were prominent landmarks in public places, and the Magi, or Magi, the official priest class of the kings, became the guardians of the flame. The origins of this term, Magi, comes from the Magioi, the Greek name for the tribe that provided the priest class for the ancient nomadic Medes, Medes, who had conquered the Assyrians in 612 BCE. Anyway, so this Magi priest class of the kings became the quote guardians of the flame. Although Darius, who was again an early Achaemenid ruler in the Persian Empire, although Darius had decreed that the Avesta, which was their sacred text, was to be recorded in gold and silver on 12,000 ox hides, there is some dispute among scholars as to whether Mazdaism should be regarded as the official religion of state. There is reason to think that even the Achaemenian kings regarded themselves as Ormazd. There is reason to think that even the Achaemenian kings regarded themselves as Ormazd's representatives on Earth, the representatives of Ormazd on Earth. Sorry. The end of the Achaemenid Empire began with the defeat of Xerxes by the Greeks at Salamis. That's depicted in what's that film? The 100, I think. Yeah, so Xerxes, his defeat ended the Achaemenid First Persian Empire at Salamis in 481 BCE. And then in 332 BCE, Alexander of Macedon, that would be Alexander the Great, crossed the Zagros Mountains, entered the magnificent capital at Persepolis. In 332 BCE, Alexander of Macedon crossed the Zagros Mountains, entered the magnificent capital at Persepolis. Sorry. Entered the magnificent capital at Persepolis and destroyed it. Typical Alexander. Thank you. Quote. In less than 100 years, from Cyrus' rise to the death of Xerxes, the Persians had produced a religion that replaced idols and blood rites with a god and a moral system, a government reigning over a diversity of nations living in peace, a philosophy concerned with ethics, tolerance, and justice, and finally, an art that celebrated an extraordinarily high level of civilization. Quote unquote. That's from Sandra Mackie in the Iranians. Cheetham goes on. With the collapse of Alexander's empire, his cavalry commander Seleucus seized Persia, and the Seleucids maintained control for 160 years. In the end, they were ousted by the nomadic Parthians, that would be who began the third dynasty, I think. The nomadic Parthians from the steppes of the north. The first Parthian chief, Arsaces, or Arsakes, Arsaces, Arsaces, established a dynasty that lasted from 163 BCE to 224 CE, and, although tumultuous and unstable, managed to keep the Romans at bay. The history of Persian culture from the Alexandrian period on is marked by the effects of its contact with Hellenic civilization. Alexander's great empire had the effect of bringing together a multitude of diverse elements from a variety of traditions. This grand melting pot included the monotheism of Judaism and later of the early Christian sects, Greek philosophy and religion, and the traditions of the East. Under the Arsacids, the effects of the spread of Hellenistic mystery religions, particularly the cult of Mithra, began to be felt. Mithra occurs in the Avesta as a figure subsidiary to Ormazd, yet is himself one of the great gods. He is a solar god associated with light, a god of war, and a universal provider. With these attributes, it is easy to see how he came to be connected under the Arsacids with the concept of a messianic king-savior. The deification of the king is a characteristic feature of the Hellenistic and post-Hellenistic dynasties, and the connection of the Magian priests involved in the sacrificial cults of Mithra with the ruling families connects the cosmic eschatological mythology with the political structures of the time. I'm going to read that again because it's important. The deification of the king is a characteristic feature of the Hellenistic and post-Hellenistic dynasties, and the connection of the Magian priests involved in the sacrificial cults of Mithra with the ruling families connects the cosmic eschatological mythology with the political structures of the time. The cult of Mithra seems to have begun in Mesopotamia and Asia Minor, but was to spread throughout the Hellenistic world. Another thread woven into the fabric of Hellenistic culture is the group of beliefs collectively referred to as Hermeticism. The texts that have come down to us as evidence of this system were composed between the 3rd century BCE and the 3rd century CE. They are held to have been revealed by Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great. The content of the Hermetic religion combines astrology, magic, alchemy, and other occult sciences in a Judeo-Egyptian Iranian matrix suffused with Platonic and later Neoplatonic elements. The magical cosmology central to Hermeticism is based on the perception of a cosmic system of sympathies and correspondences, most importantly between the human microcosm and the macrocosm of the world of nature. The influences of this cosmology in the West can be seen in the heretical and magical undercurrents in theology and philosophy, handed down through Marsilio Ficino and the Renaissance Platonists, Paracelsus, Robert Fludd, and Isaac Newton. Characteristic of Hermeticism is the doctrine of the esoteric transmission of secrets. Eliade writes, quote, "We must not lose sight of the fact that the revelations contained in the great treatises of the Corpus Hermeticum constitutes a supreme gnosis, that is, the esoteric knowledge that ensures salvation. The mere fact of having understood and assimilated it is equivalent to an initiation. This new type of individual and wholly spiritual initiation, made possible by attentively reading and meditating on an esoteric text, developed during the imperial period and especially after the triumph of Christianity. As we shall see, the Hermetic corpus, like the works of Aristotle and Plato, was preserved to return to the Latin West by the civilization of Islam. In the year 208, in Fars, F-A-R-S, Fars, the original seat of the Achaemenids, Ardashir succeeded to the throne of a tribal monarchy surrounded by the chaos of an Arsacid empire collapsed into internecine warfare. His success in establishing his authority over the rival monarchs began the rule of the Sasanians, which is the 4th dynasty in pre-Islamic Iran. His success in establishing his authority over the rival monarchs began the rule of the Sasanians that lasted until 637, when, nearly destroyed by the Byzantines, the weakened Persian army was finally defeated by the Arabs at Qadisiyah on the Euphrates. The Sasanian period marks a burgeoning of Persian art and culture, but also a rigidification of Mazdaism and the strengthening of the power of the absolute monarchy and of the priesthood. Ardashir realized that emphasizing the divine rights of kingship, a tradition inherited from the Achaemenids, would help cement his authority. He made Mazdaism the official religion of the state, and the Magi, who had maintained the old religion for hundreds of years independently of the kingship, were now officially in the service of the rulers. Quote from Saramaki, "In a grand manipulation of symbols, the sacred flame of the temple became the flame of the king, as well as Ahura Mazda." By the end of the Sasanian dynasty, the Meiji had become largely tools of the power of the state, and the religion had lost touch almost entirely with the original teachings of the prophet. Persian culture, however, remained stable. That would be the prophet Zarathustra. Persian culture, however, remained stable. Sarah Mackie writes, the themes of ethics and behavior bred by religion, kingship and justice, art and customs, tolerance for diversity, and an eagerness for assimilation lived on as they had lived on under the Achaemenians. That the uniquely Persian culture and identity survived and prospered must be credited to the Sassanians. However, in the end, it was the Iranians themselves who defended a unique form of nationalism which came from an emotional commitment to culture. When Iran fell to the Arabs in the 7th century, Persian culture stayed intact to fertilize Islam and define it for Iran. The early years of the Sasanian dynasty are marked by the rise of the religion of Mani, who was born near Ctesiphon, CTE, Siphon, Ctesiphon, around 216. So again, the Sasanian dynasty is the 4th dynasty in pre-Islamic Iran, and it is concerned with the rise of the religion of Mani. By 242, his influence, meaning Mani, had spread to the point that the emperor, Shapur I, recognized the religion and allowed him permission to preach throughout the empire. Mani conceived his mission to be to establish a universal religion of salvation from the suffering inherent in this world, based on the correct knowledge that saves, gnosis. Thus, it represents perhaps the most popular and widespread of that group of beliefs referred to collectively as Gnosticism. There is much controversy and confusion in the vast and complex literature concerning Gnosticism. It is important in reading Corbin to distinguish Gnosticism, sensu stricto, whatever that means, Latin, from gnosis, as Corbin uses the term. So again, gnosis is not Gnosticism. Yep. The former, Gnosticism, is based upon a radical dualism of evil and good, a denigration of the material world, and a pessimistic view of the human condition. The latter, gnosis, refers to the esoteric inner spiritual essence of any religion. It is this meaning of the term that is pertinent to Corbin's work. There can thus be a Christian gnosis, a Jewish gnosis, an Islamic gnosis, without necessarily implying any particular cosmology. Robert Avens summarizes. Historically, Gnosis constitutes the esoteric element in the official or exoteric religious traditions of the world. As such, it must be distinguished from Gnosticism, which flourished before, during, and after the rise of Christianity. The predominant view of Gnosticism is that of a radically dualistic religious movement, positing the existence of two equal and contrary forces in the universe, a good God and an evil demiurge. The good God did not produce the world, and he doesn't rule over it. He is transmundane, acosmic, unknowable. The demiurge is an inferior god, responsible for the creation of the world and all the calamities issuing from this act. Gnosticism sees man as a misplaced spark, or pneuma, of the divine light, engulfed in darkness through no fault of his own. He must struggle to free himself from the mortal encasement, and soar back to the Empyrean realm from which he came. That's Gnosticism. And that's going to contrast with the Mazdaism cosmology, but I might also just read the footnote here. So we were just reading a quote from Avens in the New Gnosis. So, quote, since Harold Bloom has written the preface to the new edition of Corbin's Creative Imagination in Sufism of Ibn Arabi, it should be noted that Bloom's treatment of Gnosticism in his own work Omens of Millennium is influenced to a large extent by Hans Jonas, although it is ostensibly based in large measure on Corbin, and tends in the end to emphasize a pessimist view of creation, which is not that of Corbin himself. So Bloom, writing on Gnosticism, influenced by Jonas, who basically, I think, gets it wrong. We're going to be arguing. Quote, this is from now Tom Cheetham saying, I will risk the suggestion that perhaps Bloom's view of Gnosticism and of Corbin can be correlated with his claim that Shakespeare represents the pinnacle of Western literature. George Grodeck has proposed that with Shakespeare we find the culmination of a literature that brings us, quote, news of the human. One that has ultimately proved narrowing, since it is focused upon the ego that is now essentially bankrupt, complete, and dying. The other strain in Western literature, represented for Grodeck by some of Goethe's works, brings us, quote, news of the universe, rather than news of the human, news of the universe, and is based upon an awareness of divine instinctuality. A champion of the former literature would perhaps be more at home, that's the literature of Shakespeare, would perhaps be more at home in a world-denying Gnosticism than in the Gnosticism of theophany that Corbin represents. That's interesting. Moving on, so we were discussing Gnosticism, and now we're going to say, and we're almost at the end here, this contrasts strongly with Mazdaean cosmology and adds an additional element of heterogeneity to the cultural palette that Islam was to confront. It was during the Sasanian dynasty that much of the work of cultural assimilation of traditions from the West and the East was accomplished. This was to lay the groundwork for the cultural climate that existed in Persia at the time of the Islamic triumph and guided the course that Islamic theology was to take there. The range of intellectual developments in Sasanian Persia can be indicated by events at opposite ends of the empire. First, in the south and west, the translation of Greek texts was to have a profound influence on the course of Islamic thought. Second, in the north and east, the Greco-Oriental tradition of what Oswald Spengler termed a magical culture was preserved and developed, and was to enter eventually into the Islamic culture of Persia. Of enormous importance to the history of philosophy and theology in Islamic Iran is the complex relationship among Mazdaean eschatology, Greek philosophical speculation, and the Islamic revelation. The influence of the Greek tradition on Islamic thought is largely mediated by translations of Greek texts, first into Syriac and then later into Arabic. One of the chief centers for the translation of these texts was the school of the Persians at Edessa, modern Urfa, in southeastern Turkey. The Byzantine emperor closed the school in 489 because of the heretical tendencies there, and many of the scholars relocated to Nisibis in what is now northern Iraq. There, they founded a school of theology and philosophy. Another school, likewise comprised largely of Syrian scholars, was in Jundi Shapur, near Dezful in the western part of modern Iran. Many of these translators and scholars were Nestorian or monophysite Christians, whose views on the nature of the incarnation of Christ were to be rejected by the official church at the Council of Chalcedon in 451. The continued existence of these and other heretical formulations concerning the relation of spirit and body in the lands east of the Mediterranean is a crucial element in the history of theology in Islam. Also of significance for the interpretation of Greek philosophy is the fact that many of these writers did not distinguish clearly between the ancient Greek philosophers and the early monks and fathers of the church. This conflation of Greek philosophy and Abrahamic revelation made quite natural what we shall see is one of This conflation of Greek philosophy and Abrahamic revelation made quite natural what we shall see is one of the fundamental ideas of Islamic gnosis, that the angel of intellect and the angel of revelation are the same. One paragraph. In the northeastern part of the Sasanian Empire, what is now eastern Iran and central parts of Asia, parts of Central Asia, the cultural milieu was a rich combination of traditions, retaining the diversity brought about by Alexander's establishment of trade and contact between the East and West. In Balkh, B-A-L-K-H, Balkh, for instance, Everything that this mother of cities had absorbed over the centuries from various cultures, Greek, Buddhist, Zoroastrian, Manichaean, Nestorian, and Christian, lived on in it. Here, as in other cities lining the trade routes of the Alexandrian Empire, the traditional sciences of mathematics and astronomy, astrology and alchemy, medicine and mineralogy were alive and flourishing as they could not do under the increasingly anti-magical influence of the Roman Church. And so a great deal of the intellectual and cultural diversity that was driven out by the Christian culture of the West moved into or remained alive and available for transformation in the lands that were soon to become Islamic. Okay, and I have to go, so that is going to be the first half of chapter 2 in, again, Tom Cheetham, The World Turned Inside Out, Henry Corbin and the Angel Out Ahead. In chapter 2, An Oriental Theosophy, and that was the pre-Islamic age in Persia. And I'll continue with part 2 of the chapter next time.